3 weeks before my wedding, the caterer called to confirm the 40 guests I never invited. She had a warm, efficient voice with the sound of a clipboard in it, and she wanted to double-check the switch from the chicken and the salmon to a plated fillet, since the fillet ran $11 a head more, and she'd need a card on file for the difference. I stood in my kitchen with a dish towel over one shoulder and asked her to say all of that again, slower. 40 extra guests, a brand new menu, a card on file for a wedding I was paying for myself. None of it was mine. I want to tell you how that turned out because the ending is the part I'd actually want to hear if I were you, and I promise it's worth the wait. But I have to back up first. I have to take you to the day my mother-in-law quietly decided that my wedding was really hers, and to the small, boring habit of mine that ruined every plan she made. My name is Lauren. I was 31 that fall, marrying a man named Ryan, and I read contracts for a living. 9 years a paralegal at a mid-size firm downtown, which is the kind of job that teaches you one thing above all others. The loudest person in the room is almost never the one holding the paper. People think power is volume. It isn't. Power is whose name is on the line when the noise dies down. I didn't know yet how much that lesson was about to matter to my own life. I just knew, the way you know your own heartbeat, that I liked things in writing. Ryan and I paid for the wedding ourselves, nothing lavish. A restored stone barn at a small vineyard up in the Hudson Valley, 120 guests, string lights strung between the rafters, cider in the cold October air. The whole thing came in just under $30,000 that we'd saved over 2 years, skipping vacations, packing lunches, watching the number in the account climb a little every month. It was ours down to the last folding chair. Let me tell you about Ryan, because you need to like him the way I do, or none of the rest will land. He was a high school science teacher, the kind who kept a drawer of granola bars for the kids who showed up without breakfast. He was gentle and funny and slow to anger, and he loved his mother the plain, uncomplicated way you love the woman who raised you. His one flaw, the only one that ever cost us a thing, was that he could not physically bring himself to disappoint her. I never held it against him. I just understood, early, that on the day it truly mattered, I would have to be the one holding the line for both of us. That mattered to me more than I could explain at the time. My parents split when I was 7, and I spent a lot of my childhood in rooms other people controlled, in step-parents' houses and on custody weekends, at holidays I was a guest at instead of a part of. I'd gotten good at reading a room I didn't own, at being small and easy and no trouble at all. This wedding was the first big room I was ever going to build myself, from the studs out. I didn't have the words for that then. I just felt it, low and stubborn, every time someone reached for one of my folding chairs. Ryan's mother was named Carol. The first time we met, at a steakhouse she'd chosen, she took my hand in both of hers, held it a beat too long, looked into my face and said, "Finally, someone to plan a real wedding with." I thought it was lovely. I thought, this is a woman who's going to love me. Under the table, Ryan pressed his knee against mine, and I didn't understand yet, because I didn't speak the language, that the knee meant brace yourself. I squeezed her hand back and told her I couldn't wait. Here's the piece that later made her almost make sense to me. Carol never got the wedding she wanted. She'd married Gary, Ryan's father, at the county clerk's office at 19, in a borrowed dress 2 sizes too big, because her own mother had turned Carol's engagement into a battlefield, and there hadn't been any money left for a party once the dust settled. For 40 years, she'd carried around the picture of the wedding that got away, and somewhere in there she'd decided, without ever once saying it out loud, that Ryan's wedding would be the do-over. Not his, hers. I know this because it had already happened once before. Ryan has an older brother, and Carol had run that wedding like a field general, the flowers and the seating and the first dance song, all of it hers. Ryan's brother and his wife lived 3 states away now, and called on holidays, and not much else. Nobody in the family said the word estrangement out loud, but you could feel the shape of it at every dinner, the empty place where 2 people used to be. I filed that away. I file everything away. It's a condition. It started as help, the way it always does. Carol offered to pay for the flowers, a generous number, $4,000, and she said it with her eyes shining. And for about half a second, I almost said, "Yes, thank you, that's so kind." Then she said, in the very same breath, without a pause you could have driven a pin through, "And I've always pictured white lilies, so we'll do lilies." Not a question, a closing. Ryan wanted lilies about as much as I did, which was not at all. We'd chosen dahlias, the deep red ones, in season and ours. But Carol had already moved on to the linens. That night, I told Ryan gently that we couldn't take the flower money. He looked at me like I'd suggested we call the whole thing off. "She's just excited," he said. And she was. That was the maddening part. It wasn't malice, it was love with the steering wheel ripped clean out of the dashboard. But I'd read enough contracts to know that money is never only money, it's a lever. And whoever holds the lever holds the thing it's attached to. I told him that if we let Carol buy one corner of the day, she'd own the whole house by the time we said our vows. He didn't believe me. He loved his mom, and he'd spent 30 years keeping her calm. And to him, what I was describing sounded like paranoia dressed up as planning. So I didn't argue. I've never won anything by arguing. Instead, I made a quiet decision I didn't announce to anyone, least of all Carol. I would take nothing from her. I would sign everything myself. And I would put my own name, alone, on every single line. So that's what I did, over the next few months, one contract at a time. The venue, the caterer, the florist, the four-piece band, the photographer, the officiant, the rentals, the cake, the shuttle for the guests. Every agreement listed the same point of contact in my own handwriting. Lauren, my cell, my email, sole authorized party. I wasn't being sneaky about it. It's simply how I'd have papered any deal at work. You put one name on the document so that when 10 voices start shouting later, everyone in the room already knows whose voice is the one that counts. The one person I told the whole truth to was our planner. Her name was Priya, and hiring her was the smartest $1,000 we spent. She had the calm of a woman who'd talked 100 brides and 200 mothers off 100 ledges. And when I explained the situation, all of it, the flowers and the lilies and the brother 3 states away, she didn't gasp or take sides. She just nodded slowly, wrote something down and said, "So we make you the single point of contact on everything. And I hold that line for you. You get to be the bride. I get to be the wall." I could have hugged her. Carol, meanwhile, was busy. She started small, the way water starts small. She called the venue to ask about adjusting the ceremony time to fit a next-day brunch I'd never heard of and hadn't planned. She emailed the photographer a shot list 40 items long, built almost entirely around herself and her 3 sisters. She told Ryan's favorite aunt that the colors were blush and gold, which they were not, so that the poor woman showed up to my bridal shower in a blush dress, saw the deep red dahlias on every table, understood exactly what had happened, and cried quietly in the bathroom for 10 minutes. It was at that shower that Gary pulled me aside. Ryan's father was a quiet man, a retired electrician with hands like worn work gloves and a habit of standing at the edge of a room where he could see the exits. He didn't say much as a rule. He waited until Carol was across the room, rearranging a gift table nobody had asked him to rearrange, and then he said, low, "She did this at our older boy's wedding. Ran it start to finish. They don't call much anymore." He looked at me for a long second, the way you'd size up a fuse box. "You seem like you've got a plan." I told him I had a filing system. Something moved at the corner of his mouth that on a less careful man would have been a smile. "Good," he said. "Keep your receipts." Then he went back to standing at the edge of the room, and I understood that Gary had spent 40 years married to a hurricane, and that he was, in his own quiet electrician's way, on my side. That mattered later, more than either of us knew, standing by that gift table with the cake going warm. Which brings me back to the caterer, 3 weeks out, and the 40 guests I never invited. Because Carol hadn't only been suggesting, she'd been calling. She had phoned the caterer directly, introduced herself as the groom's mother, and announced that she'd be handling the final details from here. She added 40 names, her book club and her church friends, and 2 cousins Ryan had specifically, painfully asked not to invite, because the last time the family got them all in one room, it had ended with a squad car in the driveway. She swapped our whole menu. She would have swapped the date, I think, if it had come with a coupon. I'd love to tell you I stayed calm on that phone because I'm a calm person by nature. The truth is I stayed calm because I was too angry to trust my own volume. I thanked the caterer, warmly and genuinely, because none of this was her fault. I told her that nothing was confirmed, that I'd follow up in writing within the hour, and then I asked her one last question, very lightly, the way you ask the question that actually matters. Had my mother-in-law left a card for the difference? A pause. Then, yes, she had. Carol had put a deposit down on my wedding with her own credit card, the way a person puts their name on a bar tab they fully intend to run. She thought she was buying a seat at the head of the table. What she was actually doing was creating a paper trail with her own signature on it, handing a documents person the one thing a documents person prays for. I stood in my kitchen a moment longer, the dish towel still on my shoulder, and I felt the anger cool into something quieter and a great deal more useful. That, right there, was the mistake. And I was going to answer it in the only language I'm truly fluent in. I didn't call Ryan, I didn't call Carol, I didn't rehearse a speech in the mirror or draft a text I'd delete 9 times. I sat down at my kitchen table, opened my laptop, poured a glass of water, and started a new email. Then I sent the same message to every single vendor we had hired, one thread at a time, each one addressed by name. It's the coldest thing I've ever written, and I never raised my voice once, because that's the whole trick nobody tells you. The quietest paper in the room is usually the one that wins. It said, in the polite, bloodless language I write all day long, that I was the sole party to our signed agreement and the only authorized point of contact for the event. No changes to guest count, menu, timeline, music, seating, or any other term were to be accepted from any other person, including family members, without my written approval. Please disregard, and do not bill against our contract, any instruction already received from anyone else. Thank you for understanding. I read it over twice, fixed 1 comma, and hit send 9 times, once for every vendor. Then I finished my water and went to bed and slept like a stone. This is the part of the story where, if I were listening instead of telling, I'd be leaning in, because Carol had no idea any of that had happened. For 2 more days, she went on believing she was running my wedding, calling vendors, adding flourishes, picturing herself gliding down that barn aisle to music she'd chosen. She was decorating a house she'd already been locked out of and didn't know it yet. Stick with me, because the day itself is even better, and the update a year later is the part I would play twice. Within a day, every vendor wrote back some version of the same 3 words. Understood. No problem. The florist added a little heart, bless her. But the caterer sent me a line I laughed at out loud in my parked car, alone, like a crazy person. For what it's worth, she wrote, we never add covers without the signer's okay. Your mother-in-law was quite insistent. But insistent isn't a signature. Insistent isn't a signature. I wrote it on a yellow sticky note that night and pressed it to the edge of my monitor at work, where it stayed for a year. The best part, the part I didn't learn until much later, was what Carol did with those 2 days. Not knowing a single thing had changed, she called the florist one final time to insist on the lilies, and she called the rental company to add a second bar. The florist said she'd make a note and did not make a note. The rental company said they'd check with the signer and checked with me, and I said no, and that was the end of it. Carol was conducting an orchestra that had quietly set down its instruments and gone home. She just couldn't hear the silence yet. Carol found out fast, the way you'd expect, because vendors who get a lockdown notice tend to mention it to whoever's been blowing up their phone. She didn't call me. She called Ryan, crying, saying I'd cut her out, that I was controlling, that she'd only ever wanted to help, that she'd already promised her friends. 40 of them. And that was the sentence that made my stomach drop, because it meant the 40 guests weren't a threat she was making. They were a thing she had already done. Carol had mailed her own invitations, Little cream-colored cards printed at a copy shop with the vineyard's real address and our real date, sent out to 40 of her people who had no earthly idea they weren't on our list. Some of them had already bought plane tickets. A few had booked hotel rooms in a town 2 hours from anywhere. My mother-in-law had, without telling a single soul, invited 40 strangers to a wedding she wasn't paying for, at a venue that wasn't hers, in our names. I should tell you that Ryan and I almost never fought. We were the couple our friends found a little annoying, the ones who did the dishes side by side and split the last piece of anything. He'd proposed on an ordinary Tuesday. No photographer hiding in the bushes, just him, nervous in our kitchen with a ring he'd been carrying around for a week, and I'd said yes before he finished the question. So when we finally did fight that one night, it scared me more than his mother ever had. Because for the first time, our whole future felt like it might come down to whose family we were actually going to build. That was the night Ryan and I had the only real fight of our entire engagement. He stood in the middle of our living room, exhausted, caught between the two people he loved, and he said, maybe we should just let the 40 come. It was easier. It was 40 chairs. What was the harm, really, in the grand scheme of a marriage? I looked at him for a moment. Then I asked him a question I already knew the answer to. Had he ever actually read the venue contract? He hadn't. Of course he hadn't. Nobody reads the contract. That's my entire career. So I read it to him, out loud, the line in plain black type. Maximum occupancy, 140 persons per fire code, no exceptions. The vineyard's event insurance depending on that number. We had 120 guests. 40 more put us at 160, 20 bodies past the line a fire marshal had drawn, in a barn built largely of dry old wood. So your mother, I said, as gently as I could, didn't just invite strangers to our wedding. She invited them past the fire code, into a building I signed my name on. Something shifted in his face then, and it wasn't about the fire code, not really. I think it was the word strangers. Ryan had spent his whole life translating his mother, softening her, apologizing for her before she'd even finished the sentence, paying the toll of yes because the toll of no had always been so much higher. And now here he was, doing the arithmetic out loud. 40 people he'd never met, at the wedding he'd packed 2 years of lunches to afford. He sat down slowly on the couch. Okay, he said after a long time. Okay, what do we do? Not what do I do, we. What we did was not dramatic, and that's the part I'm still proudest of. We didn't want 40 confused, innocent people flying across the country only to be turned away at a barn door. So Priya quietly pulled a list of everyone who'd already contacted the venue, thinking they were coming, just so we'd know who to watch for at the door. Then Ryan picked up the phone and told his mother, kindly and clearly and exactly once, that she was going to call every last person she'd invited herself and explain there had been a mistake. Because they were her guests, not ours, sent under her hand. If she wouldn't, we would. And we would tell them the plain truth about how they'd been invited. She called them. I'll give her that much, and I mean it. It can't have been nothing. It cost her something I don't think Carol had ever spent in her whole life. The admission, 40 separate times, out loud, to her book club and her church friends and her sisters, that she was not, in fact, in charge. Each call a small, controlled demolition of the story she told about herself. By the end of that week, she sounded, Gary told me quietly, older, smaller, like a general who'd looked up mid-battle to find she'd been commanding an empty field the whole time. And it cost her in the other way too, the literal one, because Carol had booked a string quartet, a secret one, 4 musicians she'd hired to play her in during the processional, her own private grand entrance, and she'd put $1,200 down to hold them, non-refundable inside 30 days. Priya had already called them politely the moment we found the booking, to explain there was no slot for them in the timeline and no authorization on the event. So Carol was out $1,200 in full for a performance that was never going to happen, at a wedding that had never for 1 second been hers. After that, it went still. 2 full weeks of quiet, which anyone who's ever dealt with a carol will tell you is the loudest sound there is. She was polite in the clipped, careful way of a person saving it all up for one occasion. Ryan kept flinching at his phone, waiting for the explosion. But I wasn't waiting for anything, and I told him so. I kept my binder, a slim white one, tabbed by vendor, every signed contract and every locked email tucked into its own plastic sleeve, sitting right there on the kitchen counter where he could see it. "The work is already done," I told him. "Whatever she tries on the day, there's nothing left to move. The paper decided months ago." The morning of the wedding was the kind of clear, gold October day you can't order and can't buy and don't dare take credit for. I got dressed in the loft above the barn, in an old farmhouse room that smelled of cedar and dust and somebody's coffee. And through the floorboards, I could hear the chairs going down below. 120 of them, exactly, in the rows we'd chosen together at Priya's kitchen table with a diagram and 2 pens. And underneath the scrape of the chairs, I could hear something else. A voice. Carol's voice. She'd arrived 2 hours early, and she had a plan of her own. She had, first of all, worn ivory. A floor-length ivory gown that in the wrong light read as white, and that she would correct anyone about instantly. "Ivory," she'd say. "It's clearly ivory," while knowing exactly what she'd done. I heard about the dress before I ever came downstairs, from 3 separate people who each thought I'd want a warning. I didn't, particularly. A dress is a costume. Costumes don't sign contracts. I finished my lipstick, looked at myself in a spotted farmhouse mirror, and went down to get married. By then, Carol had already started. Priya found her up in the front rows, quietly, methodically rearranging the reserved seating cards, moving herself and her 3 sisters into the seats meant for my father and Ryan's grandmother, a woman of 90 who used a walker and needed the aisle. Priya, who had run 200 weddings and buried every one of her reactions somewhere deep years ago, simply began gathering the little cards back up. "These are set per the couple's final seating chart," she said, pleasant as Sunday. "I'm not able to change the plan without Lauren's sign-off. She's upstairs. But I promise you she'll be busy for the next hour." Then, one by one, unhurried, Priya set every card back down exactly where it had been. My father here, Ryan's grandmother there on the aisle near her walker, Carol in the front row, in the mother of the groom's seat, right where she belonged, her 3 sisters back in their own good seats behind her instead of flanking her like a court. Carol watched her do it. 40 years of practiced authority, meeting a woman with a laminated diagram and absolutely nowhere to be pushed. She opened her mouth. She closed it. She went looking for a softer target. She found the band next. She walked up to the 4-piece we'd hired, all of them tuning, and asked them to learn a song so that she could sing her son in down the aisle. It was tradition, she told them, family tradition, though it was nothing of the kind. The band leader, a patient man with reading glasses pushed up on his forehead, looked down at his set list, then back up at her. "We play the set the contract holder approved, ma'am," he said, not unkindly. "And I'm sorry, but I don't have you anywhere on here." He turned the page toward her so she could see it. Our names at the top, not hers. She tried the officiant to wedge in 10 minutes of remarks about the family, about legacy, about the mother of the groom. The officiant smiled and told her the ceremony ran the way the couple had written it. She tried the caterer, one last time, to slip a plated course back onto a menu she'd been dreaming about for months. The caterer, my caterer, the one who'd sent me the sticky note line, told her gently that the kitchen was already plated for 120 and couldn't add a thing. Each of them, patient and kind and utterly immovable, told Carol the same thing in different words. Insistent isn't a signature. By the time I came down the barn stairs in my dress, Carol was standing alone in the middle of the floor in her ivory gown, and the room had gone quiet in that specific way rooms go quiet when 100 people are pretending very hard not to watch. She turned, and she found Ryan, and she played the oldest card in the deck, the one that had never once failed her in 30 years. Her chin lifted. "I am your mother," she said. And Ryan, my conflict-avoiding, peacekeeping, mother-soothing Ryan, who had apologized for this woman his entire life, crossed the floor and took both of her hands in both of his, the exact way she'd taken mine in that steakhouse a year before. He held them a beat too long, on purpose. And he said quietly, so that only the first few rows could hear it, You're my mother, and I love you. And today I'm getting married. I need you to go sit down now, Mom, in the seat with your name on it. She sat down. That's the whole climax, and I know it isn't the one people want. There was no scene, no shattered glass, no wine flung across a white tablecloth, no security walking anyone to a car. The thing everybody wants is the explosion, and the thing that actually heals you is how quiet the real ending turns out to be. Carol walked to the front row, to the seat with her name printed on a little card in Priya's steady hand, and she sat in it. And then she watched her son marry me under a canopy of deep red dahlias. 120 guests, exactly. The band playing the set we'd chosen at Priya's table. The dahlias we'd picked because they were in season and because they were ours. No lilies, no fillet, no 40 strangers pressed past the fire code into a wooden barn. Not one seating card moved from where it belonged. It was, down to the very last folding chair I'd been so stubborn about, the room we had built ourselves, from the studs out. I married Ryan in it as the light went gold and then rose and then dark, and the string lights came on overhead like somebody up there had agreed with us. There's one photograph from that night that I keep framed on my desk at the firm, and it isn't the first kiss or the first dance. It's Ryan's niece, Ellie, 6 years old, our flower girl, fast asleep across 2 folding chairs in the middle of the toasts, with her shoes kicked off and dahlia petals still stuck to the hem of her dress. And behind her, soft and out of focus, you can just make out Carol, watching the room she didn't get to run. She doesn't look angry in the picture. She looks like a woman realizing, a little too late, that the wedding was never the thing she'd been so afraid of losing. So here's what happened next, because I promised you the ending is the part worth waiting for. For the first few months, Carol tried out her version of events, the one where I was the cold, controlling girl who'd cut a loving mother out of her only son's wedding. She told it to her sisters. She told it at church. The trouble was that far too many people had been in that barn. They'd seen the calm. They'd seen a bride who never raised her voice, and a groom who loved his mother enough to tell her the truth in front of everyone. The story didn't take, and somewhere in there, quietly, she stopped telling it. About a year later, Gary called me. Ryan's father, the electrician, the man who told me by the gift table to keep my receipts. He said Carol was doing a thing she had genuinely never done before in all the time he'd known her. She was asking. She'd phoned before Thanksgiving to ask what she could bring, and then she'd brought exactly that. A pie and nothing else, no agenda smuggled in beside it. She asked before she booked. She asked before she bought. She asked before she assumed. I don't know what to tell you, Gary said, and I could hear something like wonder in it. 40 years, took a barn full of witnesses, because that's the thing I've come to believe, watching it from the outside. You can't yell somebody out of needing control. Carol had been yelled at plenty across 40 years, by her own mother, by life, and it had only ever made her grip harder. What finally loosened her fingers wasn't anger at all. It was standing in a golden barn full of people she wanted to impress, trying every door she knew, and discovering that not one of them opened anymore. Not because anyone was cruel to her, because the paper had quietly, permanently, stopped answering to volume. There was a moment, that first Thanksgiving after, one small moment, that told the whole story better than any card ever could. Carol arrived with her pie, and halfway through the meal she started to say something about the tablecloth, the old reflex twitching to life, and then I watched her physically stop herself. She set down her fork. She asked instead whether she could help clear the plates. It was such a little thing. But I'd spent a whole career watching people discover, too late and all at once, exactly where the edges of their power really were, and I knew precisely what I was looking at. A woman meeting a boundary and choosing, for once, to stay on the right side of it. On our first anniversary, Ryan and I drove back up to the vineyard, just the two of us, and drank cider on the hill where the chairs had stood. A card came in the mail that week, from Carol, in the careful cursive of a woman who'd had a year to think. Inside, one line. "You built something I couldn't have. I'm glad it was yours." I read it twice. Then I went and found my white binder, the one from the counter, its contracts gone soft and furred at the folds, and I slid her card into the front sleeve, right where the venue agreement used to live. I don't need the binder anymore. I keep it anyway, up on a shelf, the way you keep the thing that taught you the difference between being loud and being right. I read contracts for a living. I know better than anyone that a wedding is not the paper, and a marriage is not the seating chart, and a family is not a signed and dated agreement. But I also know this now, bone deep, in a way I only suspected before that phone call 3 weeks out. When someone reaches for the thing you built with your own 2 hands, you do not have to raise your voice. You just have to be the name on the line. Carol wasn't a monster. She was a woman who never got her wedding and mistook mine for a second chance at her own. I don't hate her. These days I even like her, on the far side of a boundary that finally holds. But I meant every quiet, bloodless word I typed at that kitchen table. And I would type them again tomorrow, comma for comma. Insistent isn't a signature. It never was. And the name on the line was always going to be mine. If you made it all the way here with me, thank you for sitting with this one. It means more than you know. I'd honestly love to hear where you land on it. Was I right to lock every vendor to my name from the very start? Or should I have handed Carol her toast and her lilies just to keep the peace? Where's your line with family on a day that's supposed to be yours? Tell me in the comments, and while you're there, drop your state and your age. I'm always curious who's out there listening in the dark. Take care of yourself. I'll see you in the next one.